The On Target Institute presents a teaching from the Men on Target small group curriculum. Now with today's session, On Target founder Vince D'Acchioli.
Hello men, and welcome to our review session for Module 1 of the Men on Target curriculum. I want to really press you right now to go to our website, otm.co, and be sure and download the handouts for this session. As you know, for every session we have handouts available at otm.co. These handouts are going to be very important for you today because there's a place for you to rate how you've been doing in the areas we're going to be discussing. And there's also a wonderful commitment card, a prayer and commitment card that you can fill out for all the men in your group, so you'll have something to pray for them about specifically. Now, in this session, we are titling this Module 1 Growth Keys. We're going to review the various teaching sessions that we've been bringing to you and allow you an opportunity to evaluate how you've been doing in all of these areas. So, for those of you who weren't able to be with us, you can always catch up by going online or by ordering the earlier sessions and be right here with us. Let's look at the growth keys. We began by talking about our goal is to create the man God intended. And if you recall, we started out with talking about the vision for what we're doing with an iceberg example. We talked about how if we look at an iceberg in an organizational context, we can also use that same illustration and look at it in a biblical context. In an organizational context, the iceberg represents an organization where the base of the iceberg is the vision or mission, which informs its core values or operating principles, and ultimately the behavior, which is what is seen at the tip of the iceberg, is consistent with the vision and core values. If you look at it in the context of an individual, if you recall, we talked about how the base or the vision or mission ought to be my Bible, and that it's an alignment of my Bible, my core values or beliefs, and ultimately my behavior. We talked about how oftentimes moral schizophrenia, which is truth learned on Sunday that is not applied on Monday, moral schizophrenia happens when we chip off the top of the iceberg and float it off. It's called compromise. And how important it is for us men to make sure that we are aligned. Then we talked about the change process and how difficult it is to bring about change in our life. And I shared with you what I call the 6 principles for effective change. And if you remember, the slide will show you the first 3 are what we call the cycle of hopelessness. It's event, awareness, and decision. We go to an event, and the event brings about an awareness that we need to make a change, and we make a decision to change, but then ultimately that change doesn't take place because we haven't entered the 4th phase, which is commitment. Commitment, if you recall, we said is the bridge you must cross to transform the old man into the new man. And then ultimately, commitment must lead to process. And that's the part we don't like, guys. Process is work. You know, it's kind of like, you remember the illustration about lifting weights and how when I was a young kid, I got these new weights and went and lifted them for 20, 30 minutes, went to the mirror, ripped off my shirt, and got frustrated because I didn't see any real progress. So if you don't commit to the process, then change is not going to happen. And then ultimately out of the process, we can begin to see change if we stick to it by making a commitment. So after that, then we started talking about who is this God? And if you remember, we used a cell phone as an illustration. We talked about how incredible this cell phone technology is these days and how we're so amazed at it. And yet, when we think about it, that cell phone was manufactured by man, by you and me, by mankind. And yet, one hair out of our head, if we look at that under a magnifying glass or microscope, we don't even understand what's going on in that one little hair at the cellular level. And so raise your awareness. Going from that cell phone, if man made the cell phone and one hair on our head is more technologically advanced than that cell phone, it begs the question, who made man? And we tried to talk about how awesome and how incredible this being we called God really is. So we talked about who is this God. Then we talked about the problem. In our culture, the problem is we kind of understand who God is, but we're we're pursuing oftentimes the wrong God. We talked about the difference between pursuing a God that we want versus the God who is. I think I shared with you the story of my own life, that when I first accepted the Lord into my life, I didn't want the God of the Bible. I wanted the God I wanted, the God that would agree with me living my life the way I wanted to live my life, and I avoided the God who is real, lives in heaven, and listen guys, he has an opinion, and I think I mentioned this before, guess whose opinion don't count? So we have to make sure that we are pursuing the right God. Then we talked about, what does he want? Okay, we're kind of understanding who he is now. What does God really want of you and me? And our verse comes from Matthew 22:37, probably one of the most important verses in the entire Bible, where someone asked Jesus the question, which is the greatest commandment in the law? And you guys all remember this. Jesus, knowing the man thought he already knew the answer, replied, and this is powerful, here are the two greatest commandments. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, he says. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. And you may remember me sharing that tender story about speaking in the all African American church and challenging all of us to really consider the importance of loving the Lord your God first as a prerequisite to being able to love my neighbor as myself. Those two commandments, listen guys, are in that order for a reason. And it's very important that we get that, because God's ultimate plan for planet Earth is really quite simple. It can be distilled into one sentence, and it is this, that an invisible God is made visible, listen, in the actions, not words, in the actions of those who fellowship with his son Jesus, period. That's God's plan for planet Earth. Then the next several sessions we talked about, okay, how do I get to know this God? And guys, listen, let me just go through this quickly. It begins with trusting God. You remember Peter in the boat and Jesus walking on the water, and that funny little illustration we used early on where Peter says, Lord, if that's you, tell me to come to you on the water, because I know if that's you, Lord, I can trust you. And what does the Bible say? Jesus said, come on, Peter, it's me, you can do it, right? And Peter got down on the boat and he literally walked on the water. Why? Because he trusted in his God. But listen, men, as soon as he took his eyes off of Jesus and he focused it on the current circumstances, the water, the storm, he began to sink, literally. So the first thing is that we have to trust God. The second thing we talked about is the importance of letting go of our way of doing things. We've got to let go of our wanting to control things in our life in order to be able to really get up close and personal with God. And then the third thing, and the most important thing, is that we need to draw near to him. Draw near to him by spending time, that's the four-letter word we talked about, alone with God every day. And listen, the key here is to be alone with God. You remember we talked about you cannot develop intimacy with God if you're in a crowd. And we talked about the importance of being careful not to allow your time in church or with others in prayer to substitute for your personal alone time with God. Guys, I've been making a commitment recently to get up at 5 o'clock every day. I'm spending now 2 to 3 hours alone with God. And I got to tell you, it's life transforming. And I'm not saying you've got to spend that kind of time every day. That's the way I have to do it, because it takes me that long to get my mind clear. But it's very important that you spend alone time with God every day doing three things. We need to be reading the Word, praying, and praising him. Isaiah 30:21 says, whether you turn to the right or to the left, your ears will hear a voice behind you saying, this is the way, walk in it. We will never be able to have the kind of intimate relationship with God to where we can really drill down and hear his voice unless we are willing to spend time every day with God, reading the Word, praying, and praising him. We unpack those three ideas in a pretty comprehensive way. And again, if you weren't there for those sessions, I'd really encourage you to look at them, download them, and research some of the things that we talked about. Now, in keeping with our promise, for this session, we want to talk about life implication and life application as well. Life implication: without an honest review and commitment to change, I will not become the man God intended. That's simply the way it is, guys. We've got to commit to reviewing our progress, being honest with ourselves in order for us to become the man God intended. Life application, here's what we want you to do in this session. Here are the different areas that I want you to evaluate yourself on a scale of maybe 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, 10 of course being the best. How are you doing in, first, understanding and living out godly character? How are you doing on a scale of 1 to 10? How are you doing in the 6 stages for change? Where are you? Have you made that commitment? Have I made a commitment? And then seeking the God who is, not a God that I want. How are you doing in that area? Establishing a quality devotional habit. Very, very important. Be honest with yourself and those at your discussion table. And then reading the Word. And finally, prayer. How are you doing in that area? Reading the Word, prayer, and praising God. Now, what I want you to do is fill out that form that you have before you. Have a discussion with the men at your table and be honest with them about how you're doing in those areas and ask them to pray for you. There's a commitment card that they can fill out and say, I'm going to pray for Joe because he's admitted to us that he's struggling in the area of really spending alone time with God. And let's all commit to each other to pray for each other every day so that we can truly become the man God intended. Until next time, I love you guys. Thank you so much for being part of OTI, and we'll see you from Module 2. God bless.